Welcome to one of the Maket Collective Conversations via StreamYard. I'm Glenna MacKay-Johnstone, and I'm part of the committee. I'm here with Andrea Boyd, who is one of the 2024 ambassadors. Welcome, Andrea. I'd like to start off with asking you a couple of questions about your early years in piping. So where did you get the inspiration to get into piping?
Thanks, Glenna. I'm glad to be here and chatting with you. Yeah, inspiration for piping. Well, I grew up in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, which is on an eastern province in Canada, and steeped in a lot of piping and drumming tradition in Antigonish. Both of my father and my father's family have been involved in piping and drumming and pipe bands for decades. My grandfather was a piper, and my father was a drummer, and my uncle Doug was a piper. My father Ian was a drummer, and so I guess I grew up in it. When I was born, both of them were still competing, and as you can hear, right on cue, my daughter Flor is. I'm just gonna give her a little rock here. Here we go. They were both involved in the pipe band scene, the Antigonish Legion pipe band. They were a very active competition pipe band in the 70s and into the 80s. And then when I was born, both of my father and my uncle were still competing, but my dad was really getting into more judging. So as a child, I went around the game circuit in Nova Scotia in the summertime and was always keenly interested in it. And I think my earliest memory was around the age of 4 or 5, deciding that I wanted to take up piping. And the Antigonish Island Games was always a very big moment for the Boyd side of the family, for us to get together as a family and for all the family to come together at the Highland Games. And it's really in Antigonish a bit of a come home week for many families that come back to Antigonish that weekend. So piping and drumming and the Scottish culture has been really central, I think, to the way to the community I was raised in and the way I grew up.
So your parents had a huge, or your dad's side of the family, I'm sure your mom as well, had a huge, I guess, encouragement for you to be involved in that. So what were your aspirations as, a young girl in the piping world and learning how to play? What did you see yourself? Where did you see yourself going in terms of, what did you want to do?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, it was really my father's family's from Antigonish. My mom is from Alberta, from Calgary originally, and had come to Nova Scotia as a teenager. Her father was working in oil, trying to build a pipeline back in the 70s.
Wow.
Funny going, for our international audience, this is a conversation that is still alive this decade and hasn't been done, but something that's been talked about since the 60s in Canada. But that was what brought them from Alberta to Nova Scotia when she was a teenager, to Cape Breton. And then she went to St. FX, met my father. And so my mom didn't come from a musical background or this part of a cultural background, but was always very encouraging of me piping. And I think, what does piping, like any activity, brings a certain level of, discipline and commitment. So I'd say my mom was always very encouraging, where my father had come through the pipe band competition culture and was, I would say, very encouraging of me competing and competing solos and competing bands and being the best I could be through that. I'm just going to pick. So bear with us on this interview journey. I've got a 12-week-old here, and I think she will be more happy if she sits. There we go. That's better. So yeah, I think I always wanted to be involved in piping and pipe bands, and I did I started out taking chanter classes, but quickly got into the Antigonish Highland Society band after a year of tuition. And I was very fortunate that my timing of coming through this was at a great time in history, I guess, looking back at it now. The 90s was certainly a vibrant time in Canada for Celtic music and tradition, with the popularity of fiddlers like Natalie McMaster and Ashley McIsaac, and bands like the Rankin Family and the Barry McNeils. So I think there was a real sort of almost pop culture element to Celtic music at that time. And of course, in Ireland, you had Riverdance and Lord of the Dance, and all of that, I think, sort of popularized this at a time when I was growing up, and made it more accessible. And there was many children and teenagers that were interested in piping and drumming at that time, in addition to it being culturally, part of the fabric of Antigonish and of Nova Scotia. So I think I was very fortunate to hit it at a great decade and at a great moment in time, because it's evolved a lot since then. I don't believe there is a pipe band in Antigonish anymore. So these things, evolve and change, but it was a great time to learn and to be influenced by Celtic music more broadly as well.
So growing up in Antigonish, I mean, you had all these outside influences impacting your decision making and your music. How important do you think competition is all around in making a good player, a good piper?
It's an interesting question, and we were just, before we pressed record, we were talking about Celtic connections and music festivals, and competition to me has always been, I think, as a teenager, and certainly was something that drove me, and I think competition is really important in our art form as a vehicle for improvement and a vehicle for setting objectives and milestones, because we don't have, at least in Canada, really, we don't have as much of a performance culture for piping and drumming. So the performance is the competition, really. So I think competition's really good for basically setting improvement goals and discipline and certainly repertoire as well. And we can talk about the merits or dismerits of set tunes and things like that with Pembroke. But I think when I look at my life now, the discipline, that learning new music, that going to band practice, that going to lessons and having to turn up at lessons prepared. When I was a teenager, I was going to, I've had wonderful teachers throughout my life, but when I was a teenager, I was going to John Walsh, and there was he was a wonderful teacher, but showing up unprepared was not really an option. So I think that competition and regular tuition really makes you better, and helps you establish some really good, I suppose, life habits as well.
I was going to say that. So I know for myself, I looked at kind of my competition time and how that influenced my university, career and study habits and all of that. And it was really transferred into all of that job and everything, because you have that discipline that you have to have if you're going to be at a high level.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I would say, as I have enjoyed competition, I enjoy everything that surrounds a competition. I wouldn't say I enjoy, and I don't know how many people do enjoy the actual competing, of the business of actually competing. I have found myself over the years getting more nervous, and I suppose that's something that comes with age and experience, is more awareness of the consequences of actions and competing. And so I've become more of a nervous competitor, I would say, as I've gotten older. But I do enjoy competitions. I enjoy going to competitions. I really enjoyed going around the games in Scotland, especially in the camaraderie of that. And so I would say I enjoy the camaraderie of competitions, but whether it's the competition or not, I suppose I am competitive, and I do like to do well in competitions. So there is that added advantage. Would I like competitions as much if I didn't have as good a success as I've been lucky to have? I don't know, but I do enjoy them, solos and band.
I'm going to piggyback on some of the challenges that you just discussed about, competing and growing older and feeling a little bit more anxious or nervous about that.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of the listeners probably have similar experiences as to what you have had or have when competing. Is there any advice that you can give to people of things that have helped you or have maybe worked for you in certain circumstances?
Good question. I think I've tried to develop techniques like when I get, as you can see, I wear glasses. They are, when I take them off, everything just kind of melts away. So I don't compete with my glasses on because I find it helps me to stay more focused on what I'm doing. When I'm playing, if I'm playing light music, competing in light music, and I'm in an indoor setting, I try to pick a spot in the room to focus on, a curtain or a light fixture or something like that, and try to concentrate. I think the biggest challenge for me is staying focused through the performance, and I'm sure that's a challenge for many people, whether with a range of challenges we have concentrating for long periods of time, especially in Pibroch, and staying focused in Pibroch playing, but being prepared as well. I've learned that over the years, being prepared, it's like studying for an exam. Mm-hmm. Funnily enough, exams are less stressful if you prepare for them. So I think putting the work in over the winter as well, and feeling prepared for competition definitely lowers the pressure, or lowers the anxiety, because you feel like you're putting your best foot forward. And I think many people probably, maybe people have to ask themselves, what are their objectives? Why do they want to compete? Mm-hmm. Is it to better themselves, to get a prize, to meet new people, to have an activity? And maybe by asking themselves those questions, it'll make it easier to prepare for the competition.
Those are really important questions, and I don't think a lot of people ask those questions to themselves.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, you have, like you said earlier, a beautiful daughter that you had 12 weeks ago.
Yes.
And just thinking about you being a female in piping, and now having a beautiful daughter as well, what are your wishes? And I know that you probably won't say you must have bagpipes, but what are your wishes for her growing up in this culture? And how would you guide her through all of this?
Well, I'd say my number one wish is that I hope that she is interested in music and interested in arts and culture, because I love big macro arts and culture, and I do love music, and I love obviously piping and drumming, but what music has done for me and given to me. So I hope that, first of all, that she is a music enthusiast and wants to learn an instrument. Even better if she wants to learn pipes and picks up a chanter. So I hope that she wants to be a musician.
Would you teach?
I hope that she that she wants to be piper. My partner Mathieu is Quebecois. He's French Canadian, so he doesn't come from the same tradition as I do, but he also is an arts and culture enthusiast. So I think for us, we would both want her to be involved in some way. But I think, and this is maybe something for parents or people that are in this, that are becoming parents, is, and this is something I've only really started paying attention to in the last, really since coming to Ottawa in this time around in the last 3 years, is what kind of culture do you want to create, or do you want to foster and encourage and support within a piping community or pipe band community? Do you want something that is going to encourage families to participate and be part of it? And I think the band that I'm involved with now, the Ottawa Highlanders Pipe Band, and I guess I didn't realize how much it was until I now have a baby, is really a family forward band, and how many of young parents there are in the band, and how accommodating it is to young parents and to families. So I realized how many people after, at Maxwell this year, it was so hot. And of course, we were all kind of sitting around the camp, but, you don't have to go to the beer tent. Not everybody is there, despite thinking that's what I used to think. But there's many people that, that sit around the camp and create a great family atmosphere, and teaching. And do you want to have a teaching program? And how are we going to encourage the next generation? So, I think the players in Ottawa Highlanders and the leadership, and lead drummer Mark Passmore has certainly been very, very vocal about wanting to create more of a teaching program. And that's the only way that this is going to, especially outside of Scotland and Ireland, the only way piping and drumming is going to sustain itself is by teaching, and by the people that are already doing it to teach and encourage. So I think if you're thinking about particularly young women and girls, think about the culture that you're part of already, and how you can foster or encourage an environment that you would be proud and want to raise it and bring a child into. And that's something I'm certainly very conscious of now.
Would you teach your daughter yourself, Andrea, or would you have someone else?
Ooh, I think it's too early to say right now. I think I would like to start encouraging her, but I would say that from what I see from other relationships, and you as an example, Glenna, I think, outsourcing the teaching beyond the scale is probably the best way forward, beyond the basics, I think. And it creates, it's like, we send our children to school for a reason. It creates a healthier learning and environment.
Yeah, I know. I definitely lived it with my dad, and my children have lived it with me. And there's definitely pluses and minuses to the whole thing. I like your comments about family being like at the heart of promoting the culture and everything, and it's really important. I look at the band that my children were involved in, and the families were incredibly supportive. And if you don't have that, it's really hard to keep things going, right?
It is, and you need that support system. And when I was in the Antigonish Highland Society band growing up, there was a tremendous family support system, and the parents were around. And in fact, back then, we took a bus to all of the Highland games, and there weren't many bands doing that, but we took a big yellow school bus, and that meant that there were parents did chaperoning on rotation. So the parents didn't have to go to all the games, but knew that the kids were going to be well looked after when they were on the road. So that worked really well. And if there's a way to do that kind of carpooling, so that it takes the burden off the travel, which I think when I look at what are the barriers to access, I think definitely, especially in a province like Ontario, the long journeys that we have to make from Ottawa down to the southwestern Ontario can be a barrier to accessing competition, both in terms of cost and time. So especially if there's multiple siblings in a family. So if there's a way to do that, but yeah, the parents are what keep the bands going and supporting. and at all levels, it's the moral support and then the practical support of being there to make the lunches and to have the water bottles and the towels and keep everyone in line on game day.
Totally. All right. Thinking about your piping career, what do you think is one of, or a couple maybe, of highlights that you think stand out in your brain, whether it be concerts, competitions, Kayleys? What really
Yeah.
stands out to you?
Yeah. Well, I guess segmenting it into those sort of categories of moments, certainly starting off competitively with the Antigonish Highland Society Pipe Band when I was 12, just 2 years into the band, winning the North American Championships at Maxville in grade 4. That was certainly a very early experience and a very memorable and formative one, and kept me going really through my teenage years, and then going on to play with the Bog Hall and Bathgate Caledonia Pipe Band and St. Lawrence O'Toole Band, and winning majors with both of those bands and winning the World Championships with St. Lawrence O'Toole. Those are certainly fantastic memories. From the solo point of view, I've been lucky to have great success as well as an amateur piper, in Canada, and then going to Scotland and playing professionally and having great success, more so at the Argyllshire gathering of the two between Oban and Inverness. And those are probably some highlights for me. The silver medal, of course, and various sort of prizes around the games in Scotland. But performances, I would say I've enjoyed the performance moments more, and the concerts, and playing at the Royal, the Glasgow Royal Concert Hall, in front of a packed house. Both with Bog Hall and St. Lawrence O'Toole, and also as individually with the Celtic Connections Festival. I've those have been some really thrilling moments. But also all the concerts. Ireland has a very vibrant, and I think Scotland more now has a very vibrant pipe band concert scene, and doing concerts with St. Lawrence O'Toole, famously in Armagh and in Ballymena and in various other places around Ireland. Playing on stage with Field Marshal as well, playing together. And then solo competitions, I was very fortunate to be invited to do number of different recitals for piping societies in Scotland and in Ireland, and playing in the Highlands and Islands, and particularly the endurance of the of the recital circuit in Uist and Lewis. When you're playing, they invite you to do 3 halves when you play the recitals in South Uist. So that's a real test of memory and endurance playing out there. But those have been some fabulous memories. And then the informality, informal playing in pubs. And when I was a student at St. Francis Xavier University in Nova Scotia, we had a Celtic society that we put on some great concerts formally, and we had some great kitchen parties. And I was very fortunate to be, again, speaking earlier about just timing and life happening at certain periods of time when exciting things are happening. And when I was a student at St. FX, there were so many other musicians, fiddlers from Cape Breton. The Beaton sisters, Dawn and Margie, were there. Glenn Graham was doing a master's degree at the time. Dara Smith was there. And then pipers like Kenneth McKenzie and Callum McKenzie and Kevin Dugas and Emily Kate McClellan. And there was really a lot of musicians there, and we had a lot of fun, and had a lot of tunes in kitchens throughout Antigonish at that time. And then playing in Ireland, when I was in St. Lawrence O'Toole Pipe Band, spent a lot of time on Ackle Island, which is where Terry, Tully, and Eileen had a home, and playing in the pubs in Ackle is, especially around St. Patrick's Day, is really, really quite an experience. If you're able to make it, I highly recommend. I know people want to go down to Kerry or want to go to Galway, but I highly recommend Ackle Island if you want a real true taste of Irish music.
I've got a few more questions for you before we wrap up. One of the big ones I would say is, who would be the most influential people who have guided you in your journey, in terms of whether it's tuition or just listening to them and wanting to play like them and just enjoying their music so much.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Well, I would say, as I mentioned earlier, I came from, I think, a pipe band tradition. My father and my Uncle Doug, and so when I was a young girl, we had all of the cassette tapes, the bog hall, the Rubik Cube, and the Shots recordings, and the World Pipe Band Championship recordings. But one that I completely wore out was the '78 Fraser's Live in Ireland.
Mm.
And I know we're just receiving the news of Bill's passing, and what an influence he was on music for people all over the world, but particularly in Canada as a real trailblazer for us here. And I didn't know Bill really well. I got to know him a bit more later in life when he was judging me when I moved back to Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly the Live in Ireland recording was very influential for me. And all of the music that was there, I think I could play along with the entire cassette tape when I was sort of 12, 13 years old. But as I mentioned, I've had really great tuition and great people influencing my piping. And I started out piping with Scott Williams, and as I mentioned, John Walsh was a teacher, Bruce Gandy, and then Terry Tully was a big influence for me. And then I took tuition from Robert Wallace and most recently from Willie McCallum. So they've all had a great formal impression on me. But thinking back again, how lucky we were to have Scott used to organize, excuse me. Scott used to organize workshops and bring in teachers from Ontario. So I was very, very lucky to have exposure to, Bob Worrell and Ed Nye and Jim McGilvery and Ken Eller and your father, Ray, that would come into workshops and judge the competitions in the Maritimes. Hugh Cameron as well on the drumming side. So those were great influences to have around in a sort of informal way and guiding and realizing that there was this world outside. And this is before the internet. So, realizing that there was this world of piping and drumming outside of Nova Scotia and outside of my immediate world. Yeah, those were some big influences.
Do you see yourself as a role model? I know in my family, with my daughter, Kaylee, she sees you very much as a role model, a female role model, obviously, in piping in an area where there's, at the top end, there's not a lot of girls that get to the high end in piping. Do you see yourself as a role model, and what do you want to kind of, I guess, portray to others, especially females, moving forward in a relatively dominant male world?
Well, I've certainly never seen myself as a role model. I am aware that I have been very fortunate in my life to have achieved what I have, and I say that not because I think natural talent only takes you a certain way, and that it's up to you if you want to pursue your path of whether it's competitive success or performance success. Take every opportunity that gets presented to you. And I say that especially with performances, thinking back to all those recitals I was so lucky to do, and to travel and to see parts of the world, because of bagpipes. Take the opportunities when they come to you. Work hard. What would I say to other young girls? I mean, looking competitively, there's been times, of course, where I've thought, oh, did I not get that prize, or did I not do as well because I'm a girl, or so gender comes into it, but also geography, my demographics. Is it because I was from Nova Scotia? Is it because I was Canadian? When you're looking at some of the bigger competitions, but forget all that and put that to the side, and just, you think prizes, sometimes they come your way and sometimes they don't. And that's the same for everybody. And I think everybody feels that way. And for me, as a girl, I think I was lucky. I never really thought about it, to be honest, as a teenager, because there was real gender equity and equal opportunity for girls and boys. And I never thought about gender until I went to Scotland. And then when I went to Scotland in the solos, there were quite a few other girls competing, that were teenagers or in their young 20s when I went from Scotland and from other parts of the world. I'm thinking like Tracy Williams and Fiona Manson, and of course Jenny Hazard, and then Anne Spalding was still competing at that time, and Margaret Houlihan, of course, and there were other girls. With pipe bands, I would say that I was lucky to have sort of big brother figures that took me under their wing. And I think when I played in my first year playing in Bog Hall, I was very, very lucky to have a couple guys in the band that sort of, I was 19 when I joined that band. So I was lucky to have a couple guys that really looked out for me and took me under their wing and supported me in my playing and encouraged me. Because for me, the biggest challenge was the physicality of it. And I don't think that same challenge exists now, because people realize you don't have to play gut busting reeds, and actually you can adapt your instrument so that it's comfortable to meet you, and you can get volume out of reeds that aren't necessarily really strong. So back then, the physicality of it and the stamina required, and learning how to manage cane and sheepskin, those were the big the big learning curves for me coming from Nova Scotia. But so having a couple of champions in the band that believed in me, that believed that I had the fingers to do the work and I had the musicality to do the work, but I needed the moral support to do the physical work, and to also just be respected in the band. And I think that's a big challenge for when you're in a minority, any minority, is to want to be respected and to want your contribution to be appreciated. So I would say find the people that believe in you and believe in what you have to contribute, and align with them, and your road will be easier.
Good words and good messages there. It's funny that you should say take the opportunities. My dad used to say exactly the same thing to me as a young girl. Take every opportunity that comes your way, as long as it's not going to get you in trouble.
Yes, with that caveat, asterisk disclaimer.
Exactly.
And I think, I do get asked the question about gender a lot, and being a woman in this space, and I just keep going back to the mantra of just treat other people the way you want to be treated and you wish to be treated.
Yeah.
And I am living in Ottawa, and as I mentioned earlier, Ottawa, I work in an association that represents municipal politics and thinking about women in politics and gender, and I think women face a lot of challenges regardless of what the setting is. And I don't think piping or pipe bands are different than other workplaces or hobbies. And I think look for environments that are supportive and will support you and that you feel comfortable making a contribution to, because every organization has its own culture, and just before you jump into it, and particularly pipe bands, think about whether it's the right fit for you.
Yeah.
And that goes for men and women. That would be my best advice.
Yeah, great advice. Okay, let's end this with the last question that I have for you, and it deals with commitment to fostering the legacy of piping. And I know it's a big topic, but I've had quite a few people in the last couple of weeks ask me where I see kind of piping in the next 10 years. And I mean, I'm doing my part in terms of teaching to try and teach as many people as I can. But what do you see as some of the things we need to implement to be able to create a legacy for your daughter, and my daughter?
Yeah. Well, teaching is critical. If we don't teach and we don't encourage young people to be part of the community, then it's not sustainable.
Yeah, exactly.
And that goes for organizations that are teaching. It goes for pipe bands. It goes for Highland Games. It goes for associations. It's the entire ecosystem. And unless we're teaching and we're creating spaces that are encouraging, and we've had various debates about how do we encourage people from outside of our cultural tradition or culture to take up piping and drumming. So how do we make it more welcoming for people from other either ethnic or communities, particularly in Canada, particularly in North America, where I don't think it is sustainable if we just look inwards.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to do a better job at attracting people and family, and maintaining tradition is important, but attracting new people from outside of our own background is really important to the sustainability and longevity of bands and Highland Game, particularly Highland Games, and
Exactly. Yeah.
the business model for Highland Games, critical. In terms of competitions, and I've been thinking a lot about this, within the current environment I'm in, leading a pipe band. What is it we're trying to aspire to be? I just see over the last 20 years, teaching in the schools in Scotland particularly has just created a new level of class of player.
Mm-hmm.
There is a professional route to piping and drumming in Scotland now, where you can have a career, teaching in the schools, or you can make a living being a professional piper or drummer, and that's just not really a viable option in many places outside of Scotland or perhaps Ireland. So what are we trying to, what's the main objective? What are we trying to achieve? Are the days of bands from outside of Scotland or Ireland winning the Worlds or putting forward top grade 1 bands? Do we need to reconsider what our objectives are? And what does excellence look like? And what path do we want to go down to sustaining the art form and winning the Grade 1 World Pipe Band Championships maybe isn't the most sustainable course, and we need to look more broadly at supporting the lower grades, grade 2, 3, 4, 5,
Yeah.
sustaining Highland Games and making them more accessible. Focus just on competition is not what the majority of the public are going to pay admission to see, the Grade 1 competition circle. So I think we need to start thinking a bit more creatively about how we're going to create sustainability for the future.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, I think we'll end there, Andrea. I really enjoyed our discussion, and
we have a sleeping baby now, so maybe we could keep going now.
Exactly. It was wonderful catching up with you and discussing a lot of these topics. They're really important, and I know you're a trailblazer, and I look forward to seeing what you do in the future as well with your band. I know you're on a little bit of a hiatus right now, but I know you'll be back at it because that's you.
Well, thanks, Glenna. And talking about sustainability, I am very, very fortunate that when I took on the band, motherhood was not in the plan when I took on being pipe major of the Ottawa Highlanders pipe band. But I have great players around, and Scott McIntosh is taking on the pipe major role for the year ahead with Mark. So I'll be on the sidelines cheering on the band, and I've been out to a band practice this winter just to see how everyone's doing. But I will, no doubt I will be back in some shape or form. This is going to be my first summer in 32 years, and that's including the pandemic of not competing. So I think a little pause actually might do me good.
It's different on the other side of the fence, definitely.
I believe, yes. I'll be able to. I'll see how I enjoy it or don't enjoy it.
Exactly. I'm sure we'll catch up in the summertime and have a few conversations.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Glenna. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure too, Andrea. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.